Join us as we unravel our deep-rooted relationship with money, from earliest memories to eureka moments and building wealth. Birth to Net Worth, with me, Tristan Trenberth. Welcome to another edition of Birth to Net Worth. We've got an amazing guest today, yet another leadership development and life coach, supporting entrepreneurs and small businessmen into growing into their authenticity and creating much more impact in their world. I met this gentleman through having read a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy. And we've had a few great conversations the last couple of weeks, and it really led me to an obvious decision to invite him to join us on the show here today. So without further ado, Andrew, welcome to Birth to Net Worth. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely, Tristan. Thanks for having me, and I'm excited for our conversation to come.
So give us a little background of what you're up to in this day and age.
Yeah, I mean, I there's lots I could tell you, but in the last 5 years, I've really stepped into the world of coaching. I did 4 years part time where I was working for a corporate job, and then in this last year, I've transitioned to full time. So I'm a full time business owner and do a lot of amazing work. I've spent the last 5 years really supporting men to get really attuned to like their gifts and who they are just from that authentic self, um and from there really be able to have more of an impact, have more of just that sort of, I guess we'll call it lightness that they bring to the world. So it's been really neat to bring that to the world, and then also just support coaches in their own development as well.
Fabulous. That's awesome. And you're north of the border, you're up in Canada, is that right?
Yes, yes, I'm on the west coast of Canada, somewhat. I'm probably a couple hours from the coast, but I'm in a province called British Columbia and live in a city called Kelowna.
Nice. Awesome. Well, let's start the journey. Andrew,
Let's
what
do
is
it.
your first memory of money, and what did that mean for you when you had that memory or realization?
Gosh, I was sort of thinking about this before we came into the conversation. Um, it's hard to tell, but I was sort of thinking of like what was an impactful moment, and I think that the most impactful moment I can remember from earliest childhood, my mom had me and my brother, and we had moved from a city called Prince Rupert to Prince George, which was the hometown that my mom grew up in. At that point, she was no longer in a relationship, so my mom was basically running a single parent household. And the memory that was there is that I could tell like we were okay financially. Like, yes, we had a roof over our head and we had like provisions that were needed, but like there was a sense that like there wasn't much more, in that sense. Like it just really felt like we had enough to get by, but it really did feel like something is kind of off here. The uh this is not the traditional family home in that sense.
Got it. Got it. So I think many of us are familiar with that situation. And, it's very few that kind of come through life with a silver spoon in their mouth. And I think a lot of those people, they identify later in life how out of touch with reality they were growing up. So, I think that all of our listeners are going to really relate to that background, including myself.
hmm
So, what kind of age were you when you had that realization?
I couldn't have been older than 5, maybe 5.5 when that situation occurred.
Yeah. So, do you have siblings? Do you have other family members that lived in the home that were either older, younger, twins, or other siblings that you refer to their different stages and understandings of things? Because obviously, we very often learn from siblings and family members in the home closely. What did you observe with them when they were older or younger than you that they had realizations themselves, or you saw behaviors that you might relate or stem back to those sort of experiences?
Well, I think that as I reflect on it, I mean, it's almost like there was a sense of like entrepreneurialism, like say with my brother, right? Like I can think of my brother who was older at the time. He's 5 years older, it was almost like there was a sense of like, hey, we have to get creative about creating money because we don't have money. We don't get money getting handed to us by our mom or that type of thing. And so, like, that's one thing that I can kind of remember is that, like, there was sort of this, like, aura of poverty like in our space, which then sort of just had us like, okay, we have to kind of play outside the box to bring money in because it doesn't feel like we have it. It doesn't feel like we have it as a family unit. Oh, it looks muted.
And what kind of town did you grow up in? Was it kind of a rural type town? Was it, metropolitan sort of area, or suburb?
So in those days, yeah, that city of Prince George, it was probably about 75,000 people at that point. Um, I would say like, what would I describe it as? I mean, it's definitely not rural. It's a town. It's probably like it's sort of like the northern connector to British Columbia. So it's a bigger town, not too big. Definitely like where we grew up. I mean, if I look back on it now, probably like lower class to middle class. Like I
Yeah,
don't recall at any point really ever seeing like wealth, a high amount of wealth ever in that sort of childhood
yeah,
experience.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a similar town, probably 80 to 100,000 people, one industry, which was the clay industry.
Mm,
And, that was starting to get into decline when I was growing up. So things were changing from, it was definitely not an affluent town, but it was one of the sort of busier, growing towns in the county that I lived in. Um, so yeah, we were aware of some people that were of greater means than us. Carlisle Bay was one of those areas where there were bigger houses, nicer cars, the odd Rolls Royce here and there, but certainly not a lot of those things. Um, but it was interesting to sort of just be aware of the way people spoke to each other and interacted. And unfortunately, everyone was very good to each other
mhm.
that I'm aware of. It was a very close knit town. Did most people know each other? I mean, 80,000 people to know as a growing up is a lot of people, but did you get the feeling of going through town and knowing a lot of people that you saw, the same faces, or
So we were connected to a church community there, and I think that that's where, at least in the sort of suburb that I lived in, a lot of that church community lived in that area. So
Mm,
I think that's where a lot of that closeness came from during that time, was that there was this, again, like lot of just church events happening, a lot of support structures happening, sort of in that smaller sort of community aspect. In terms of the bigger city, not so much, at least not at that time.
yeah, got it. So sort of 5, 10, 15 years old, your brother being 5 years old, as you mentioned, what was he doing to make money, and did that inspire you to do things? I did a paper round when I was a kid. I got on my bike every morning at 6 o'clock, rode down the shop, picked up the papers, sorted them, went and stuck them through mailboxes, on the route, or route as we say, as that's for the Americans.
Same with us.
Um, but I made a few pounds every week, and it helped things along. What is it that you guys were able to do to be entrepreneurial and create create some sort of income for yourself?
So, yeah, sort of like a pivoting time, we'll say. I did end up moving to a different city, which was actually my hometown around 13. Um, and and there's two distinct things I can remember. So, kind of prior to the age of 13, I would actually sell chocolate bars, and it's funny because the initial sort of phase of selling chocolates, we'll say, was for like the church fundraisers, or like we were going to a private school that was connected to the church. So like if we sold chocolates, it would mean we'd get to go on like a field trip to a different city. But when I
Mm,
moved to Victoria, prior to turning 13, or just in that sort of age range, it was really funny because again at 13 you couldn't really have a job. It would have to be sort of on the side or something like that, or like you're saying, a newspaper route. But I actually connected with this guy, and I was selling chocolates like outside of grocery stores, but it wasn't for fundraisers. It was actually just for cash coming into my pocket,
Yeah.
and I actually did quite well with that. Like, during that time period, it was pretty lucrative.
Yeah. The candy man in your teens. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, for sure.
so what did you notice around you with, other people with or without money and attitudes towards the contrasting levels of people with money? Was there anything that you sort of picked up along that way?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, as I'm hitting the age of 13, we could even say in that age of 13 to 18, again, like I wasn't living with my mom at that point. I had a guardian at that point, and he himself, wonderful man, provided what he could. But again, like we were probably on the verge of poverty there, right? We
Mm,
had the necessities, but we didn't have anything else outside of that. And then what happened there was like my grandma lived in the same town, and she would sort of provide for like the additionals that was needed. If I needed shoes for basketball, I'd get that kind of thing. And so it was very much that type of an experience where it was just like, okay, I have enough. I'm sort of trying to get into the job market at that, and those years. And then as I looked at, say, friends that were in my school, um, there was, again, not everybody, the area, the city that I lived in this town called Victoria, or the suburb that I lived in, it's quite a suburb because you would have sort of low income housing with $1 million houses like a couple blocks down the road.
wow.
And so it was quite a dynamic where I had friends where again, their families were probably upper middle class, but and you could see it. Like, I can think of one of my good friends specifically. Like, they lived on the river, they had kayaks, they had a beautiful home. They were very humble people. But yeah, it just, how would I distinguish it? It just felt like that lifestyle was sort of out of reach, in the easiest way to put it. Like, it just felt like, oh, that's for other people, that's not for somebody like me.
Yeah. It's interesting how the drunk monkey in our mind creates those stories of limits and
Yeah.
sort of boundaries that we can't have. And, you know, we realize different things through life, but it's our own stories that limits us, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
So so what did you do as far as, getting through high school and college? And, what was your sort of first, vocation or sort of proper work? And
Sure.
how did those experiences from your earlier years maybe hold you back as you can look back in time now? And what were the things that sort of opened your eyes and release some of those self-limiting thoughts or experiences that you formed in your stories,
Totally. I mean, I think, again, as I was sort of in those kind of last high school years, I worked at McDonald's. I got into, like, sort of the manager position at the staffing level. You're still working in the store. I worked at a grocery store. I worked for a painting company. So all like vocations that they provided decent money. It wasn't gonna, like, it wasn't anything substantial. So that was sort of going into the university years again, continuing to work those types of jobs. And then I think, obviously the big one that occurred was once I left university, I got a job as a correctional officer. So I definitely went from, like, once I was finished the training as a correctional officer, I went from, making, I don't know, like $30,000 a year to 60,000, 70,000, right? So I probably doubled my income, in that first year at the age of 23. So really, not like, it was not easy work, but like a big jump. Like, that was probably that first jump in income where I saw where it was like, okay, like, I actually have a professional career now. Like, I'm not just sort of like, you know, working a job while I'm in university. This is something that, I could potentially have a career for the rest of my life, and if I wanted it to be.
So here's an interesting question. How did the scarcity affect your doubling of income effectively? And is it because depending on our experiences, we handle money in different ways. How did that cause you to handle money? Did you remain what you look back of now in a scarcity sort of mindset, or were you able to be were you more diligent with the money because you didn't have so much and you were able to manage it in a better way, which was inspired by not repeating what your mother and your other you know examples had shown you? Because I think there's the analogy of the two twins. The dad was an alcoholic. One son was in jail, criminal, blamed his dad for being an alcoholic, and he was an alcoholic himself. The other brother was a multimillionaire, blamed the dad for being an alcoholic, and his story was, I'm never going to be like that. And then the
Yeah.
other brother resigned himself to being exactly what his dad was. So, did you do you look back and see a direction that you maybe unconsciously or consciously chose that took you in one direction or another?
Yeah, so I mean, I think kind of like what you're speaking to, the sort of frugality of those previous years, that really we'll say it supported me, right? So yeah, I was very quickly saving a good portion of the money that I was bringing in, making some small investments, that kind of stuff like that. That really paid off. Um, I think that's sort of like that's the answer in a nutshell in terms of like that that was a good dynamic. Like the ability to save was good, but I think that this is the thing that I wanted to speak to. On the other side of that, I was in a profession where there is an income cap. There's only so much that you can earn, or you could earn more by working overtime, but I didn't actually have the ability to like be in control of how much wealth I was actually creating. It was literally like the more hours you put in, the more hours you earn. That was kind of the dynamic of it.
Yeah, the Kiyosaki time for money exchange in a
Exactly.
nutshell. Yeah, yeah, understood. So, um, being a correctional officer, was that something you saw doing long term, or is it something that you got into and just saw the writing on the wall pretty soon with that realization that you were capped and you were kind of limited? What was your transition? What kind of age was this? Obviously, graduating college around 2021, I'm guessing,
Yeah.
was that sort of time.
Yeah, so the goal was always actually to go into policing here in Canada. Policing is quite a great profession in Canada, um, and I had some struggles getting into the police department in those earlier years, and then so basically that was the goal. The goal was to transition from the corrections department to policing. What I ended up kind of seeing, so I did that. The corrections profession was for about 8 years, so from 22 to about 30. I think what really became apparent to me was that, yeah, it absolutely was not the profession that I wanted to have for a lifetime. I could have potentially seen like if I got into like higher and higher levels of leadership, that might have been a possibility, right? Like maybe within the government or that type of thing. But if I was to say sort of as that sort of frontline position, that wasn't really what I was interested in. And then, what again, kind of what I was speaking to, what I really started to see as I was getting to, year 6, year 7, year 8, as I'm starting to have a family and I have a wife, is that like I am not actually in control of my income potential, but also my profession. Like, there's a possibility that like one day I'm there and let's say that an incident goes wrong, like I could be fired, right? And again, that's obviously on the extreme side of things, but like even in that, it was very real to me that it's like I don't actually have control of my life, my profession in that sense. So it's like it was sort of two factors. One, I didn't really enjoy the work, and I don't have that control. So that's what started to have me shift into looking at other fields of work.
Got it. Well, correctional officers could be doing a lot of different things. Sometimes it's problem resolution, I'm sure. Sometimes, it could be counseling people in some sort of ways. Was there anything that you did within that role that sort of inspired you with the kind of line of work that you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, um, my degree out of university was in psychology, so I've always been interested in human behavior and just human development in that sense. And so I did actually do some work with the police department as well in a volunteer position over those years. And so, I think that that's always been there, right? It's just like, how can I support human beings to live better, to have a better lifestyle? And obviously, when you're talking about in the prison system or even in policing, you're dealing with people in their worst times of life. And I think that, um, the at the core of who I am, I mean, I've always liked about, we'll say, more of the policing profession, just like the sense of heroism, in the sense like you get to be sort of this warrior potentially for good in society. And I think that that's really carried on to, we'll call it values based work, right? So even into the next profession, and then once I got into coaching, I can see so many connections, because obviously I really enjoy, again, human development, supporting humans to live more of that sort of authentic life. And really just me being an individual that, I've seen a lot, I've experienced a lot, I've seen sort of the darkness of humanity, and being able to hold that space for others, it's been a huge gift. Like, it's been such a, and also being in the coaching profession, I mean, you're generally working with people who, are invested in themselves, and they are committed to change in their life. So you're also working with like a higher caliber of individual who really is showing up for themselves.
Yeah, I can imagine there's a big contrast between being forcefully at Her Majesty's convenience, as we called it in the UK,
Yes.
and those that are, investing in themselves, both the time they got skin in game. But I can imagine, I've read a lot of stories about those that are in jail that just have a realization of themselves and the world around them, and then they're ready to do that, and they've got some time to work on themselves. So I can see how that may transfer over. And
100%.
obviously, those on the inside have probably got a bit more of a rough story and a rough edge around them. A lot more hard work, but sometimes that change for them can be easier once they see the light at the end of the tunnel. That, but they've still got the history behind them that follows them to a degree.
Yes.
Have you ever read the book, Be the Coffee Bean or The Coffee Bean?
No.
Um, Really good book. It talked about being in jail. If you're an egg in
Mm.
jail, then you get hard.
Yeah.
If you're a potato, then you get soft if you're in the hot
Hmm.
water. But if you're a coffee bean, you remain as you are, but you affect those around you as your the coloration of those around you changes.
Yes.
Really, really great story around
Hmm.
that guy. So, so that really brought you into the coaching side of things. When did you sort of turn away from the law enforcement side of things?
So, probably around, my son was born in 2017, and that's where I really started to look at, okay, shifting out of the corrections field into other work. And a part of that too was that, um, my wife and I both were shift work at that time, right? And so like that was sort of a bit of a reality check, in that, like, hey, in this line of work, or if somebody is working shift work, that, the conventional, daycare or babysitting or whatever you want to call it, it's not going to be there for you. So I think that that was also sort of a spearhead to sort of move out of that profession. And then, so what I was finding at that time, was really looking at, like, okay, what are some of the skill sets that, are sort of, you could do it from home, and are needed. So I started looking into copywriting, which is really just like sales writing, that type of thing, and really more of like marketing skills. I really saw that as sort of being this on-demand thing. And then in 2018, I probably one of the best connections I've made at this point. I connected to an individual that would be my next boss. His company, did really well with subscription boxes and sort of online products, and they actually brought me on as sort of this like quasi sales and marketing role. So I transitioned out of the corrections world into sales and marketing. And then from there, we actually launched a brand called True Earth in Canada, which took off. And so basically in that role, um, I learned the marketing skills and basically just continued to go up in that company in sort of more of a leadership role within marketing as well. And then so during that time, that's where I also started finding out more about coaching and started actually bringing coaching into that organization as well, more from just like a team's dynamic. But yeah, that was sort of that pathway that was forming. Is like I got out through marketing, and then coaching became that next path.
It's amazing how we can leverage our previous skills in future things. I did
Totally.
something similar when I was in hospitality management. I used the hospitality management skills to get into a technology business that served the hotel and restaurant business, and then kind of leapt to the other side, being an IT manager to then support businesses in the hotel trade, and finally made my way out of it. But
Yeah.
before I go into the real estate game, but yeah, it's really interesting how our lives open up for us, but it's the awareness of those opportunities being there that we're either
Yes.
open, can see, or we're blinkered on, just a very narrow space. And I think that leads me to sort of the next topic, which is, you know, it's amazing how far people get through life just by luck.
Mm.
And so many people are living paycheck to paycheck in the world right now as it is, and maybe there's an increasing number by volume, and I don't know by percentage whether that's increasing drastically. I'm guessing it probably is. We obviously live in two different countries. um, but how do you see finances as being causes of stress in people and the relationships, whether it's marital or partnership relationships in a personal space or in the business world? How do you see, is that quite a big topic that comes up?
Absolutely. I mean, um, I think in any relationship where you have two different people with two different perspectives of money, you're going to have some figuring out to do. Whether it's a business relationship or say an intimate relationship. Um, it's just it's so wild, and I think that even in the relationship with my wife, right? Like it's so wild to me because in our years of dating and even in those first years of marriage, um, we really didn't have money concerns, and um, just because we were two people with jobs that had income coming in, and then as we've started to have kids and we bought a house, for example, the two different sides of our money relationship really started to come through. And so, to answer your question, I mean, at least from the relationship side of things, I think it's one of the most critical topics for two people to figure out. Because what I will say is, on the flip side of what I've seen in a lot of the work that I've done, is that when there are two people that are not on the same page when it comes to the money dynamics, that is where a lot of stress can get created, a lot of frustration, because you've got two people that are, you know, they're in a business partnership or they're in a relationship together, and yet they don't have an agreement on how money goes. And then so just all these different dynamics show up.
I think there's a lot to be said for those situations where they're probably working with unspoken agreements which the other person hasn't agreed to, because we have our idea of how things should go, and the other person's got their ideas of or opinions on how things should go, but we never kind of clarify and get an agreed operating agreement around those things. And it's not that we can document every single contingency and option and thing that might happen, but certainly communication of those things is critical to at least have the awareness of how the other person thinks,
Yes.
approaches things. And there may not be agreement, but at least if there can be the understanding of how somebody might respond or react, or the trust that when a topic comes up that it can be discussed
Hmm.
without shame or judgment, or hopefully without shame and judgment, and that it can be a proactive conversation, not a reactive conversation. Because so many of these things, I think there's a lack of trust within themselves to then share
Mm.
that with somebody else, and by the time they communicate it, it's more of a problem. I had somebody within my own community approach me within the real estate world. His house was in foreclosure, pre-foreclosure, and had been for 3 or 4 months. He hadn't told his wife at that point.
Yes.
He was just hiding the fact that he hadn't paid the mortgage. And I said, dude, your first thing is getting on the same page. Eat some crow, eat some humble pie.
Yes.
Apologize, say what you need to say, get on the same page, and maybe there's a way that she or a family can help you out of this. Because if you go down this route, you just had a kid, she's going to be out the door if you're not clear and honest with her, you know?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
it's the fear of what might happen instead of having the courage to do what's in integrity, to share the information and then discover what the response is, because it may be very different to what you fear.
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
longer it goes, the more likely it is going to be a fearful. It will line up with your fear-based, prediction of the future. But you're never going to know until you have that conversation.
Well, and
So
as you're speaking to it, right, I think it really does come back to that trust piece, and really, as much as possible, it isn't easy sometimes to really speak to, maybe where we've made mistakes or where there could really be an impact on our family or our business relationship. But at least it's out in the open. It gives both parties an opportunity to address what needs to be addressed or get the support that's needed. Versus like you're speaking to, you're in a foreclosure situation, your wife is in the awareness of it, and then eventually she is going to be aware, and how much time is she going to have to react or help make decisions? It's really important.
is that the auction notice on the door? That's not the right way for her to find out,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
you can't her to find out, and, yeah, we averted that, I think he's taken care of the stuff he needed to do, but sometimes we just need an outside perspective to help us, see
Totally.
our blind spot and, move that out the way, because the way is always through, not around it. So
Hmm. Hmm.
so, where where do your topics of conversation, without getting individual to clients, how many of these people do come to you with challenges which are through lack of financial literacy or awareness, or you know unaware of what to do and how to do things?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I would say in some ways that there hasn't been enough discussion around the financial side of things. I would say it's sort of like two buckets. There's definitely the business owner, the entrepreneur, where through our work together, maybe they're undercharging, or maybe there's an opportunity to refine their offers or how they're presenting things so that their business can generate more revenue. That's definitely been a conversation that I've been in much more over the years. And then, on the other side, not so much, in terms of those that might be employed, but it's definitely there. I'm trying. I'd have to sort of think about like what have been the specific topics. Um, I think a lot of it, in some ways, is just there's sort of two camps. One is supporting people to understand like the value of investing in themselves and like what could be possible from that. And then the other side of it is actually looking at the actual numbers. I think as simple as it is, and sometimes it's easy to bypass, but I think that there's a lot of don't look don't look at the financials, and then we wonder why we're sort of in the situation that we're in. So there's a wide range of topics. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing what's out there and how people approach these things. But so in your world now, thinking forward to having a child who's now 8 years old, 7 years old,
Yeah, yeah, he's 7. I've got a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old.
7 and 5 year old. So knowing that kids don't listen to us, but they do what they see, how how are you in your relationship with your partner kind of planning to educate, and maybe has started already educating the children on handling money and how they see money? How is that inspired by your experience to what you know that you should share with them beneficially, and what is experiences that you don't want them to necessarily have that you did, but also still impart those lessons that you gained from the experience?
Well, it's funny that you say that because the first thing that came to mind was like, "Oh god, am I even doing a good job with that at all?" You know? But I think, I think there's already probably some room for improvement in terms of how we're approaching money with them. But I think, giving us some credit and thinking about like my own perspectives on it. I mean, I I really want to support my kids to understand that um that dynamic of kind of like time for money, right? Putting in the hours for money, that really is only going to get you so far. I mean, if you get to be one of those individuals that gets into like an executive position where you're earning multiple six figures, okay, potentially great, but
Yeah,
what's the lifestyle that's going to come with that, right? From my understanding, it can be pretty stressful at that level. And
yeah,
so I think that the place where I'm at right now is really just supporting them to be open to be open to interest, we'll call it, right? Be open to any profession is possible for them, and really just kind of being in that explorative aspect of it. But I do really see over the years, the benefit even of having a business like I do is that I really want to teach them the possibilities of just exponential growth when it comes to money, right? That like our careers don't have to be tied to time, that we can really be able to step outside the norm and be able to create income at a higher level that isn't reliant on our time. And I think to me, if that can be fostered within my kids, I think that's a huge win for the years
yeah.
to come.
Yeah, leverage is one of those key conventions that we don't benefit from in school because we have to do everything on our own, solve the problems
Yes.
ourselves, don't help the kid next door to you, and it's divisive in that sense instead of collaborative where you could delegate to the kid that does maths well and you help him with his homework on English or French or whatever that is that breeds that leverage of
Mm,
time to grab better outcomes, more time that is available to us, and we get to sort of buy that time back through bartering in that sense at that level. But I think it's so important to be able to impart that on the kids for sure. Is what can we do to
yeah.
create residual or passive income that has minimal input. And I guess there can't be 8 billion Amazon or Etsy stores on the planet because everyone's going to be, that's kind of going back to the cottage industry era.
Yes.
But there are those people that can do it. They can make a substantial income over a long period of time. Sometimes it's a substantial income in a short period of time, but just getting the kids to understand how that works, that they can draw a couple of pictures and sell t-shirts and mugs.
Yes.
And maybe they make $5 a month, maybe they make $500 one month. But it's the fact that they can do it, put it up there, they make a profit share with the print company and maybe you for putting up the seed money until they paid you back and then they make more. It's certainly an easy, those are easy things to work with.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I really do think that we're seeing it, right? Like we're seeing I can't quite think of the term, but like you can look at how fast the world is moving now, how adaptable you have to be in this world. And I think it's again, it doesn't have to come from a place of scarcity, but really an understanding that like the traditional ways of making money, through jobs, those types of things, I don't know what that's going to look like in 20 years, or I don't even know what that's going to look like in 10 years. And so I think that's really the conversation that I want to be in with my kids. And I think, like you pointed to so well, is like being open to different options, right? Like being open to, you know, trying out a store on Shopify or putting up a YouTube channel, right? Like just expanding that sort of entrepreneurial mindset so that, you don't necessarily have to get locked into one path.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think those are great things. And I've sent you a link for a book called My Money Bunnies.
Okay,
It's
cool.
aimed at the young children. I don't know if you've heard of Profit First by Mike Michalowicz.
I have. Yeah, I have not read
So
it, but I've heard of it.
so it's a book that he did for kids where there's three pots of money: now money, sometime money, and one time money.
Mm,
So it has them, go through the process of deciding. They split up their, their income or their allowance or whatever the money they've earned into three different pots so they can
Mm.
actually start thinking about long term, medium term, and short term. And obviously, Profit First is quite a hefty book, depends on which one when you read, but at least it gets the mindset and the understanding of saving, maybe investing something in the longer term, and debate, deciding what they're going to do with that capital. So I think it's a very important topic to get to as early as possible with kids, because it's
Yep.
like anything, it's knowledge. A mile is a
Hmm.
mile wide and an inch deep. As soon as you understand it, then we don't need to be fearing it anymore. We understand something. Riding a bike, I remember holding onto the bike and my kid thought I wasn't holding onto it and screaming. I'd let go and she'd be, moseying along. I'd be running beside her. She thought I was holding on. She'd be fine. But it's realizing that, oh, he's not holding on anymore, and I'm fine. It's putting those pieces together.
Yeah.
And whether that's in the context of money or riding a bike, it's just working with those different, mindsets and understanding it to be able to use that moving forward.
Absolutely.
So, let me ask you a couple shorter questions. Maybe give me a couple of books that you've read that have been instrumental in your evolution through whether it's money, business,
Sure.
or entrepreneurship that have helped you a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read it for a couple of years, but one that really stood out when I read it was called "Killing Sacred Cows" from Garrett Gunderson. It's a great book. It's funny, like I'm like, oh, I can't even remember necessarily the principles of it, but I'll just say it was a great book just to read around, just the mindset of money and really, I think that time, you know, influence aspect of as well. There's so many. I mean, I'm trying to just think of down the list. Um, I really do. There's two books in the 80/20 series. So there's the 80/20 of Sales and Marketing by Perry Marshall, which I've really liked. And then there's the standard 80/20 by Richard Koch, which is an excellent book. And again, it really speaks about leveraging that 80/20 principle. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but just trust me, those are great books. Um, any other ones? Are you looking for specifically like money related books, or
Just
could it be?
books that have been
Yeah,
impactful on you evolving.
sure. Yeah. Okay. So two other big ones that I'll speak to. Again, I've read a few books, so it's hard to sort of pick them off, right away. But a great book in terms of the self image and being able to shift, our self image to one of more of an authentic self is a book called Psycho Cybernetics. I absolutely love that book. Um, Another one is a book called Inner Engineering from Sadhguru, which is all about, again, really just more of that authentic expression in the world. And I would say it's kind of got like more of an Eastern influence on it. And then, as we kind of spoke to earlier on, a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy for men specifically, just a great book in terms of, shifting from being the nice guy, the sort of the person in the middle manager role, to stepping into much more of a leadership based presence. And, from that, pushing into more and higher leadership positions.
Fantastic. Yeah, and for the viewers, that's kind of how we connected through you being certified by Dr. Glover in his coaching for that. So yeah, interesting books. So what would be, say, three key concepts for people to be aware of in their looking inward at what their
Mm.
habits and behaviors around money are?
Whew. Um, I think one, and if we're just talking about, I would say really exploring possibility. Possibility in terms of what can we actually create as an individual. And I think that it's so easy as human beings, again, just to sort of get locked into one way of thinking. Like, I have my career, I earn a certain money through my career, and really understanding that if we have a desire to pursue other opportunities, those opportunities are out there. being that we live in the digital world where, there are jobs available on Upwork, or, there's so much remote work now that's available. And then that's not even speaking to investment opportunities. I think it's, if if we're talking about sort of a shift, it's really shifting that, like, we as human beings really live in a time where there's so much possible for us. And you do not have to be the genius or the A student or the top of the class of university. I certainly wasn't that. Again, like when I left university, and I can just look at my life. It's like, man, like I am not the most skilled individual by any means. I was very much middle of the pack a lot of the way with a lot of potential, but I kept going with it. And I think that that's, again, in my sort of long-winded way of speaking to that. It's like being understanding of the possibilities that are available in the digital world, and an understanding that um, skill set, personality, all those things. Those are just some aspects of who we are as an individual. The thing that really makes a difference is the people that stay in the game, the people that are willing to keep going and keep reiterating and keep staying on the path. Those people beat out the people who have like the high potential, but they quit early. And so those are the two things that I'd really speak to is like, there's that possibility piece, and then there's that piece around just staying in the game and having the patience to just stay with it over time.
So perseverance and consistency is what I'm hearing.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. What else would you like to share with the audience before we wrap up today, Andrew?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I think what I'll share is from my journey is that my money relationship over the years, it's I very much came from a place of savings and what's in the bank account, and was very, I'm not going to say rigid, but very like focused on like what's in, what's coming out. And I think that that's a great way to approach things. And I think that there is really a place in life to start looking at. Again, we got to understand our numbers. We got to understand what's in front of us. But like in any sort of opportunity in life, that when we can start to get support, or if there's something that we really want to go after, that like being willing to invest in ourselves or invest in an opportunity, that's often going to be the thing that leads to that exponential growth in some way. And it's really a matter of just exploring it for ourselves, in terms of what feels right. And so I think that's the message that I would want to leave with others, is that it doesn't have to be, in anything in life, you don't have to go to the extremes. If you're somebody that's been frugal, you don't and you want to make a shift in your life, you don't have to just become this person that just like starts taking risks and starts getting crazy. No, but like, where can you sort of take that next step? Where can you play at 1% more of a higher level? And so that's what I would leave folks with.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. Well, it's been an amazing conversation today, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining me, and
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to sharing this with the listeners and the viewers. Um, yeah, I'm going to drop your links in the trailer here in a minute, and we'll have your bio with all your contact information. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty easy to find. I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, and I have now opened up an Instagram account as well. So those are sort of the easy ones on social media. You can find out more about me on my website as well at andrewmundy.com.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Well, all of that information will be below. Thank you so much for your time today, Andrew. We will look forward
Thank
to
you.
sharing this with the viewers, and I appreciate your time. Look forward
Absolutely.
to
Thank
seeing
you,
you guys.
Tristan.
Yeah, you're most welcome. We'll look forward to seeing you guys in the next edition of Birth to Net Worth. Thank you. Another great conversation. Check out Andrew's links below, his social media. He's on YouTube, Facebook, all of the main socials. He offers amazing coaching. Take a look at his website, see if there's anything that aligns with you. If so, reach out to him and see what works with you. See you on the next edition of Birth to Net Worth.